Yesterday, on Friday and Saturday here in Washington, D.C. We're joined now by the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, George.
This morning, we just heard from Kellyanne Conway. I want to talk about a couple of things that she said, including the president's statement at the CIA yesterday, which drew some fire from the former CIA director, John Brennan. She fired right back and said it was remarkable.
Well, here's what I'd say. To stand on sacred ground, the wall, which commemorates CIA agents who gave their lives to the country, and then talk about what he talked about was so wrong. President Trump ought to realize he's not campaigning anymore. He's president. And instead of talking about how many people showed up at his inauguration, he ought to be talking about how many people are going to stay in the middle class and move into the middle class. What
did you make of his inaugural speech? We also heard Kellyanne Conway describe it as a unifying speech. That is their view.
Yeah, it was not at all. He spoke only to his supporters. The grand tradition of these speeches is very simple. Unify people. Reach out to people who didn't vote for you, and of course a majority of people didn't vote for Donald Trump. But instead he just spoke to his supporters. And the other thing that bothered me about the speech, George, as much as sort of the narrowness of it and the darkness of America that he portrayed, was this. I think he's trying to use populist rhetoric to cover up a right-wing agenda. If you look at his cabinet, they are far from the populism that he talked about. People like Price, who want to end Medicare as we know it by privatizing it. Mulvaney cut the smithereens out of every program, even research for cancer. DeVos, who wants to end public education funding, or not end it, but greatly curtail it. These are people who have been chosen for the cabinet, aside from all of the conflicts of interest.
The White House is saying you're not acting fairly by moving so slowly on these confirmations. President Obama had far more cabinet officials in place on his first day.
He did. That's because this is a different cabinet than we've ever seen. We call it a swamp cabinet. Billionaires and bankers. And so many of them have potential conflicts of interest. The one Obama cabinet appointee who had this kind of wealth and potential conflicts of interest, Penny Pritzker, took 6 months. And these people have to divest themselves of conflicts of interest. That's the law before they come in. They were not properly prepared. Many of them, they tried to hold hearings without even their papers, their conflict of interest plans and their ethics reports, their FBI reports being available. You know, advise and consent doesn't mean ram it through. Now, if I were the Republicans and President Trump, I'd want to ram these cabinet ministers through or nominees through, because so many of them have conflicts of interest and so many of them have views inimical to what the American people want and Trump campaigned on.
You mentioned the cabinet. What about President Trump himself? You just heard Kellyanne Conway say he's not going to release his tax returns. He's sticking by that position. Some ethics experts believe that his plan to divest of his business, to give it over to his sons, not divest, did not go far enough, and that he will be in violation of the Emoluments Clause. Is that your view?
Well, the Emoluments Clause has never been tested because we've never had a president who's refused to give up his personal investments and other things. My advice to President Trump, get rid of it. It could cause you real trouble. We don't know if foreign aid comes from, goes to a country that has Trump hotels in it, whether any of these clauses are violated. You know, when you run for president, and he did it willingly, you have certain obligations. One of them would be to avoid even the appearance of conflicts of interest. He ought to get rid of all this stuff. It is not right to keep it and be president, and he's risking a lot.
Hundreds of thousands of marchers here in New York yesterday protesting the president, also in Washington. But were you comfortable with everything you heard? You heard Kellyanne Conway right there, and I think she spoke for a lot of people when she talked about those comments from Madonna talking about burning down the White House.
Yeah, look, I don't agree with those comments, but the celebrities don't matter in this march. I marched in New York. I saw hundreds of thousands of people. I didn't see a single celebrity. I saw average people, men and women, worried about women's health. If they repeal the Affordable Care Act, women will no longer be required to be treated equally. They repeal Planned Parenthood, women's health is at risk. They're even talking about undoing Roe v. Wade. So women had a right to march. That's part of the grand American tradition. And I'll tell you, the depth and sincerity of the protesters that I saw really fortified me. I got a lot of strength from this, and I think there's going to be a lot of Americans who are really willing to be much more active than they were before because they're worried about where Trump is headed.
You saw President Trump sign that executive order on Obamacare Friday night. Kellyanne Conway just said he may stop enforcing the individual mandate.
Well, look, they don't know what to do with the Affordable Care Act. Who would have thought 2 weeks into this, Democrats would be united and on offense and Republicans would be on defense? The public knows how many good things there are as part of the Affordable Care Act. The Republicans say they're going to repeal. They don't know what to replace it with. I even think his executive order exemplified that. They didn't say anything. They said, keep the good things, get rid of the bad things, but obey the law. That's because they don't know what to do. They're like the dog that caught the bus.
Let me ask you about Russia. President Trump suggested in an interview that he may seek a deal with Vladimir Putin where he would lift the sanctions, President Trump, in return for nuclear arms reduction. Is that a deal you could sign on to?
That would be horrible. And in fact, we are so adverse to it that Senator Cardin and I are introducing legislation this week to say that before the president could reduce any sanctions on Russia, that it would have to be passed by Congress.
He does now have that authority on his own, doesn't he?
He does, but we have bipartisan support. Senators McCain and Graham are supporting this legislation. And for us to repeal sanctions, given what Russia has done in Ukraine and threatened the Baltics, and now they've clearly tried to intervene in our election. Whether it had an effect or not, that's a danger that we have never faced to this extent in American history. We repeal sanctions. It tells Russia go ahead and interfere in our elections and do bad things. It tells China. It tells Iran. That would be terrible. So this legislation, I hope, will get bipartisan support. You know, a mirror thing happened a few years ago. Republicans were worried that President Obama would lift the Iran sanctions. They introduced legislation that said he couldn't without congressional okay, got 90 votes. I voted for it.
Final question. We now know the intelligence agencies are looking into possible contacts between any Trump associates and the Russians during the campaign. You heard Kellyanne Conway deny it right there. She also said the White House would not interfere with this investigation. Are you confident that's the case?
I hope so, and it would be dramatically bad if they did. Bottom line is we should have a thorough investigation of all the allegations. They are really serious.
Senator Schumer, thanks very much.
Thanks, George. Good to be here again.